The gruesome shipwreck of 1884. Survival at an unimaginable cost. What would you do if survival meant sacrificing everything you thought you stood for? In 1884, a shipwreck left a small crew stranded in the middle of the ocean, forcing them to make a choice so horrifying it would haunt history forever. This isn't just a story of desperation. It's a tale of betrayal, resilience, and a chilling twist that will leave you questioning what it truly means to survive. Stay with us, because the truth behind this infamous shipwreck is darker than you could ever imagine. The Mignonette was a modest yacht, a vessel far from the grand liners of its time. Originally designed for leisurely coastal journeys, it was never meant to cross the vast and unpredictable Atlantic Ocean. Yet in 1884, it was tasked with precisely that, delivering the yacht from England to Australia, its new home. The captain, Thomas Dudley, was an experienced sailor, a man who prided himself on his ability to navigate the open sea. He handpicked a small crew for the voyage: Edwin Stevens, his trusted first mate; Edmund Brooks, a seasoned deckhand; and Richard Parker, a 17-year-old cabin boy eager for adventure. For Parker, this journey was the start of what he hoped would be a life at sea. Young and full of curiosity, he idolized the older sailors and worked tirelessly to prove himself. The crew, though small, shared camaraderie as they embarked on their long voyage. The sunlit days were spent navigating calm waters, and the nights brought stories and laughter as they charted their course through unending waves. But beneath the surface, a tension loomed, a quiet unease about the yacht's ability to withstand the rigors of such a demanding journey. Weeks into the voyage, their luck began to falter. The winds became unpredictable, the waves more aggressive. Supplies dwindled faster than anticipated, and the crew started to feel the weight of isolation. Yet nothing could have prepared them for what lay ahead. One evening, as the horizon turned dark and foreboding, the skies unleashed a ferocious storm. The Mignonette was no match for the towering waves that crashed over its deck, flooding the small vessel and tossing it like a toy in the hands of an angry sea. The storm raged through the night, and by dawn, the yacht was a battered wreck. Dudley and his crew fought valiantly to save her, but their efforts were in vain. With a deafening crack, the hull gave way, and water surged in. The men scrambled to the lifeboat, their faces pale with fear as they clung to the small vessel. They watched helplessly as the Mignonette disappeared beneath the waves, taking their supplies and any hope of a quick rescue with her. Adrift in the middle of the Atlantic, the crew faced a grim reality. The lifeboat, barely large enough for the four of them, carried only a small supply of essentials: 2 tins of turnips and a meager amount of water. With no navigational tools or clear direction, they were at the mercy of the sea. Each man carried his own silent fears, but for young Parker, the weight of their situation was especially crushing. The adventure he had dreamed of had turned into a nightmare. The first few days were a test of endurance. The sun scorched their skin, and the salty air only intensified their thirst. The men rationed the turnips as best they could, but the hunger was unrelenting, gnawing at their insides. They passed the time by scanning the horizon for any sign of a ship, a miracle that never came. The nights were cold and eerie, the vast ocean stretching endlessly around them. Conversations grew shorter, replaced by a heavy silence that spoke to the growing despair in their hearts. By the 6th day, their water supply was gone. The men began to argue about their next course of action, each suggestion more desperate than the last. Parker, driven by the unbearable thirst, made a critical mistake. He drank seawater. The others warned him against it, but his desperation blinded him to reason. The salt only worsened his condition, leaving him weaker and more disoriented with each passing day. The days blurred into one another as the men slipped further into despair. Hunger turned their thoughts dark, their minds plagued by visions of food and home. The camaraderie they had shared at the start of their journey was now replaced by mistrust and resentment. The vastness of the ocean offered no comfort, only the relentless reminder of their isolation. By the 12th day, it was clear that if they didn't find food or water soon, none of them would survive. As the days dragged on, the men's desperation began to warp their judgment. The lifeboat became a prison, its small confines amplifying the tensions between them. The once steady Captain Dudley now wore the strain of leadership on his face, his eyes sunken, his voice cracked with exhaustion. Stevens, ever loyal, stayed by his captain's side, though his faith in their survival waned with each passing day. Brooks was quieter than usual, keeping to himself as he stared out at the unyielding horizon. And Parker, the boy who had joined them with dreams of adventure, was slipping away, both physically and mentally. By the 19th day, Parker was gravely ill. His mistake of drinking seawater had left him dehydrated and delirious. He lay curled in the corner of the lifeboat, his breath shallow, his body frail. The other 3 men could barely look at him, the sight of his suffering a brutal reminder of their own mortality. It was Dudley who first voiced the unthinkable. "We can't go on like this," he said, his voice low but resolute. "If we do nothing, we'll all die. There's precedent for what we must consider." His words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The others knew what he meant. Among sailors, there was an unspoken tradition in dire circumstances, the drawing of lots, a grim method of determining who would sacrifice their life so the others might live. But the idea of drawing lots quickly dissolved as Dudley's gaze fell on Parker. The boy was already on the brink of death, his chances of survival slim. Dudley argued that Parker's condition made him the only choice, sparing the rest of them from the cruel lottery. Stevens hesitated, torn between his loyalty to Dudley and the moral weight of what they were considering. Brooks, however, recoiled at the suggestion, his face pale with horror. "We can't," Brooks said, his voice trembling. "There has to be another way. He's just a boy." But Dudley was firm. "If we wait, it'll be too late for all of us. You don't have to be part of it, but it has to be done." The lifeboat fell into a suffocating silence as the decision loomed. The next morning, as the sun rose over the endless expanse of water, Dudley and Stevens made their move. Parker was unconscious, his breathing faint. Dudley knelt beside him, muttering a quiet prayer before plunging the knife into the boy's neck. It was quick, merciful by some measure, but the act left an indelible mark on everyone present. Even Dudley, who had rationalized the decision as necessary, couldn't escape the weight of what he had done. The 3 remaining men consumed Parker's flesh and blood to survive. Each bite was a grim reminder of their desperation, each swallow a testament to the horrifying lengths they were willing to go. Brooks, though he refused to participate, could not escape the sight of it, the sound of it. The lifeboat, once their only hope, now felt like a coffin. Days later, salvation arrived. A passing German ship, the Montezuma, spotted the lifeboat and pulled the men aboard. The crew of the Montezuma was horrified by what they found: 3 gaunt, hollow-eyed men and the remains of their young cabin boy. At first, Dudley and Stevens tried to downplay what had happened, but the truth was too gruesome to hide. Word spread quickly, and by the time they reached England, the story of the mignonette had become a national scandal. The public was outraged. Some saw the crew as victims of an impossible situation, forced to make a choice no one should ever have to face. Others condemned them as murderers, their actions a betrayal of humanity itself. Dudley and Stevens were arrested and charged with murder, their trial becoming a media sensation. But as the trial unfolded, disturbing details emerged that shook public perception. Witnesses testified that Parker had shown signs of recovery in the hours before his death. Had they waited a little longer, he might have survived. More damningly, it came to light that Dudley had been discussing the possibility of killing Parker days before it actually happened. The question of necessity was no longer clear-cut. Was Parker's death truly unavoidable? Or had Dudley seen him as expendable from the start? The courtroom buzzed with tension as these revelations came to light. Dudley, once seen as a desperate man forced to make a terrible choice, was now viewed by some as a calculating figure who had crossed a moral line. Stevens, too, faced scrutiny for his role in the act. while Brooks was praised for his refusal to participate. The trial wasn't just about the men of the mignonette. It was a reckoning with the darkest corners of human nature. The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with a mix of curiosity and judgment. Reporters scribbled furiously, capturing every word, every gasp, every detail of a trial that had captivated the nation. The defense argued that Dudley and Stevens had acted out of necessity, that Parker's death had been the only way to ensure the survival of the remaining crew. They cited maritime precedent, pointing to past cases where such actions were reluctantly accepted in dire circumstances. But the prosecution painted a far darker picture. They highlighted Dudley's premeditation, the conversations he'd had about sacrificing Parker even before the boy became gravely ill. Witnesses described the young cabin boy's final hours, his weak but evident signs of recovery. The jury was forced to wrestle with a moral dilemma. Did desperation justify the killing, or was it a cold act of convenience? Brooks, the lone dissenter on the lifeboat, took the stand. His testimony was both haunting and powerful. He described the moment Dudley and Stevens carried out their plan, the way Parker's life had been ended without his consent or awareness. "I couldn't stop them," Brooks said, his voice breaking. "But I couldn't be part of it. I couldn't let myself become that kind of man." The trial reached its climax with the judge's instructions to the jury. He emphasized that while the circumstances were tragic, the law could not condone murder, even under the guise of survival. After hours of deliberation, the verdict was delivered: guilty. Dudley and Stevens were convicted of murder. The courtroom erupted with mixed reactions. Some gasped, others nodded solemnly, and a few openly wept. The conviction sent shockwaves through society. Many supported the decision, seeing it as a necessary statement that human life could not be so easily sacrificed. Others argued that the men were victims of their circumstances, punished for doing what they believed was necessary to survive. The debate extended far beyond the courtroom, sparking conversations about morality, justice, and the limits of human endurance. In a surprising twist, however, the sentences for Dudley and Stevens were commuted to just 6 months in prison. The public's divided opinion had reached the ears of the Crown, and clemency was granted, though the stain of their actions would follow them for the rest of their lives. The case set a precedent in maritime law, establishing that necessity could not be used as a defense for murder, a decision that would influence legal systems around the world. Years later, the legacy of the mignonette remained a topic of fascination and reflection. Richard Parker's name became a symbol, a reminder of the moral complexity of survival. The case continued to challenge people to consider what they might do in similar circumstances, forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature. For Brooks, the events of those 24 days at sea haunted him for the rest of his life, yet he found solace in his decision not to participate in Parker's death, a choice that reaffirmed his belief in the sanctity of life. Even in the face of despair, he spent his later years advocating for better safety measures on ships, hoping to prevent others from facing the same harrowing choices. The story of the mignonette is not just about a shipwreck or a tragic death. It's about the fragility of humanity, the choices we make when pushed to the brink, and the consequences that ripple far beyond the moment of survival. It's a story that forces us to ask ourselves, what would we have done? And more importantly, who would we have become? The tragedy of the mignonette serves as a haunting reminder of the depths to which desperation can drive us, but it also challenges us to reflect on our own humanity. In the face of hardship, we have the power to choose courage, empathy, and morality. If this story moved you, if it made you think, please like and subscribe. Join our community as we continue to uncover stories that reveal the complexity of the human spirit and push us toward a more compassionate, understanding world. Together, we can turn these lessons into a force for good.